Hello again and welcome to another great day here on Viking.TV. I'm Anne Diamond and I have the most brilliant task of introducing you every week to someone amazing and extraordinary. I hope you agree we've not failed to meet that challenge in the past year, well, almost a year, but I think today's guest will blow you away, knock your socks off, or just plain glue you to the television for the next hour. So he is one of the world's great travellers. Now, if I'd been introducing him some 30 years ago, as I did from time to time, I would have said he was famous for being funny, as a member of the iconic Monty Python team, and I would have introduced him with this music. But oh my goodness, in the years that have ensued, this man has eclipsed even that first trailblazing career with a second, rather more languid, curiosity-driven, explorative mission to meet people and experience places all over the world in a way that's brought it home to all of us sitting on our couches in front of the TV. He has a way with people, say all the critics. He is a natural, say all his film crew and producers. And people, even if they have no idea who he is or what language he speaks, love to talk to him. Plus, as one of my sisters says, he is possibly the sexiest man on television. So let's not waste any more time and let me introduce you to you now. Globetrotter extraordinaire, household name, British treasure and peer of the realm, Sir Michael Palin. It's lovely to see you.
Oh, thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. And thank you to your sister for reviving my sort of appeal at the age of 77. But anyway, lovely to see you.
Now, where are you? Presumably you're locked down like me.
I'm locked down. I'm at home, as I have been for, the entire past year. I haven't travelled anywhere at all. I'm in my workroom, and it's a grey day outside, and the garden's looking rather sort of bare. But I'm feeling pretty calm and pretty rested.
You've written all those books behind you, I presume.
Yes, many times. No. I've read a lot of them, but I mean, I have been working now for sort of 55 years, something like that. One does accumulate rather a lot, and especially if you're traveling. I've got so many travel guides, now probably very ancient, travel guides to the Roman Empire and things like that, which probably should be changed.
Absolutely.
But no, I like to have books around me, and I like to just walk past, pick up the odd book, just take it down every now and then for no reason at all, and that sets you off to look at another book you've got. That's the way I use them, really, sort of a series of little connections.
Yes, and they give you lots of ideas for all sorts of things, I would imagine. Being such a well-known traveller and having that sort of sense of itchy feet, are your feet itching much at the moment? Are you desperate to get out and do something and go somewhere?
Well, I would like to just go out and meet people, shake someone's hand for the first time in a year. That would be great. I've no great sort of wish to go around the world again at the moment because of the situation, both nationally and internationally. It's not a sort of conducive thing to do. And also it was about a year, just over a year ago, I had my heart surgery. And that slowed me down a little bit and made me think about what I wanted to do next, what I had done, and feel extraordinarily grateful that I'd managed to survive as well as I had over all the things I've done. So I'm not anxious to go out there and take risks at the moment. So I'm the perfect sort of example of the government to try to encourage someone who's quite happy to stay at home at the moment.
Yeah, nice change for you in a way. Last place I saw you go, but you might have been somewhere in between times, was North Korea.
Yes, that was the last big journey I did, 2 weeks in North Korea in 2018. Extraordinary, really. I mean, what a great last journey to have done.
Yes, indeed. I mean, was it enjoyable or were you being followed around all the time? Did you get the feeling that it was a bit oppressive?
Well, we had with us a little team of people from the tourist authority. They weren't directly from the government, but they were answerable to the government. And about 5 or 6 of them would be with us all the time. And we, our crew and myself, we decided to try and friends with them, trying to open them up a little bit. And we gradually did. I must say, over the week, the 2 weeks that we were there, climaxing really on my 75th birthday, which I spent in North Korea on a cooperative farm, scrabbling in a field, doing a sequence about me trying to help this perfectly competent North Korean farming lady to plant her seeds and all that, which I didn't do very well. And the end of that day, they surprised me with an enormous cake saying, "Happy birthday, Michael." And the fact that was in North Korea, and these were people who were keeping a strict eye on me, I think meant that we had melted the ice a little bit and put a foot in the door.
Oh, I wonder where your next visit will be. Any ideas?
I honestly don't know at the moment. I think it may be, and hopefully if things work out, to India and New Zealand and one or two other places which are connected with the book that I'm writing at the moment, which is about my great uncle Harry, who lived 1884 till 1916. He died on the Somme, and I know a certain amount about him. Particularly, I have his diaries of his 8 months in Gallipoli at the battle there and the Somme, and I have a certain amount of other information about him. And I'm very curious. He was the youngest of a family of 7. They were a very good sort of English middle class family. Father was a vicar. And he doesn't seem to have been very successful, whereas the others were. And I've got some information about when he went to India as a tea planter and got rather bad write-ups from the company about not being up to the job and all that. And eventually, at the age of 29, going to New Zealand to become a farmhand. And he fought in the First World War very successfully at Gallipoli and at the Somme, but remained a lance corporal, refused any decorations or any other rank apart from lance corporal. So something intrigues me about him. Was he really hopeless, or was he somebody who perhaps just rejected the whole imperial idea that was around at the end of the 19th century?
Isn't it interesting that some of the best stories can come from closest to home? Because that's not the first time you've written about a member of your ancient family, as it were, is it?
No, I've written about, I made a film actually about his father, great uncle Harry's father, Edward, who was a Don at Oxford, who at the age of 39 went on a walking holiday in Switzerland and met up with an American girl who was 17 and a half years. We know that from his diary. He fell in love with her and eventually married her 5 years later. And she was an orphan from the Irish famines of the 1840s, had gone to America in one of the coffin ships, so-called because of the casualty rate, sailed across the Atlantic and had fallen on her feet because she was adopted by an American lady who was a single woman with a lot of money and a very good idea of education for women. And she sent the girls, called Brita, to the only girls' school in America at that time, which was giving a very, very good education. So she came to Europe, and that's where she met my grandfather. Yes, I've written about that.
And he was an Oxford Don, and in those days they weren't allowed to be married.
No, they weren't, certainly at the college he was at. So he had to give up he was vice principal of the College of St. John's in Oxford, which was top of the academic tree, and would have gone on to become principal, almost certainly. So he gave up quite a lot. But that little period there, I fictionalized that for the film, and then there was a rival for his affection for the girl and all that sort of thing. So that's the start of really where I'm writing about Uncle Harry, because I've got to know a bit about his background, his family background, and that's fascinating enough. And then to come to these 7 children, one of whom was my grandfather, and the youngest of whom was Harry, who didn't work out too well.
Well, you never know what you might find out.
No, I'm hoping it's a detective journey.
If future generations write about you, they will be able to say that you were knighted, you were a peer of the realm. Congratulations, first of all, on that. That must feel fantastic. How was it? How was the whole experience of being told you were going to be knighted and then becoming a knight?
Well, you know, I had cold feet when I was first told I was going to become a knight. And you have about a weekend to decide, tick the box. I want to become a knight of the realm. I don't. It's almost like that. And I panicked a little because I thought, well, I'm a Monty Python. You know, Python wasn't particularly interested in knights, apart from knights who said me. And so, you know, was it right? Would it be a bit demeaning to the general order for me, a comedian, to be doing this? So for 2 or 3 days, I really wasn't sure whether I should accept it or not. But then the citation was for travel and for communicating, understanding foreign countries and bringing back sort of information about foreign countries and improving one's sort of our national connection with the rest of the world. I thought, well, that's okay. I'd sign up for that. Yeah. So once I'd got that out of the way, it was all rather exciting, especially the day at the palace, immaculately run. I mean, you've probably been there yourself. Have you not? This is shocking. Shocking. Man, I thought you'd be a dame by now.
I didn't know. No, tell us all about it.
Well, you go there, and my wife, sadly, is a bit immobile, and so there were a lot of steps. And so she was given an equerry with a chair who took her throughout the building to right where the investiture took place, found her a seat, took her out again in the end. We were treated amazingly well. And it's most efficiently run because you all get together. And if you're going to be knighted, you have to do a bit of footwork. There's a bit of kneeling and sword on shoulder and then stepping backwards and all that. So you're given a bit of brief training in a room with all the other would-be knights, and then off you go, and you join a line, and in comes the particular royal who's on duty that day. In my case, it was Prince William, and you go forward. I was the first to be invested that day, so I had to make quite sure I got it all right. And as I say, it's all immaculately, extremely efficiently done. The people of the royal household couldn't have been nicer or more pleasant, and it's everybody there. You know, you've got politicians, you've got leaders of industry, you've got people who are just policemen on the beat, you've got you know, people who've worked as nurses. It's a wonderful mix of people, all rather overawed by Buckingham Palace, but made to feel that you're wanted there and you're part of it, which is lovely.
I mean, it was lovely that you were invested by Prince William, but if it had been Prince Charles, his father, of course, I think he would have probably kneeled to you, because he was an enormous Monty Python fan. Were you able to exchange any pleasantries, any witticisms or anything like that, or is it too formal?
Well, no, I think you could. There was a pleasant sort of, you know, conversation we had with smiles and all that, but it was mainly about travel, because he said, you know, Prince William observed I've travelled a lot of places and asked, as you asked, where might you go next? And so I was saying, sort of, I think Central Asia or somewhere like that. So he said, well, you know, good luck, you know, you go there and I'll watch you. Yeah, that's about the closest we got to a lighter moment. No, he was very relaxed.
I wonder if he's a Python fan. I don't know if he's in the right generation. Do Monty Python fans tend to fall within certain age groups, or has it spread across the whole generations?
I'm constantly surprised at how it's spread across the generations. I think there are some people who were the original fans who had taught their sons and daughters to watch Monty Python with some success or lack of success. And then these same people are then showing it to their children now, who are 10, 11, 12. And I'm continually getting letters saying how much their children, who would be two generations behind me, really love Python and really enjoy it, because I think it wasn't ever topical. It was always about the absurdity of human behavior. And that is the same now as it was when we were writing it. So
more now than ever before.
Well, I think so. Yeah, one must laugh at ourselves, or we must smile at ourselves.
A little bit of silliness. In fact, we talk about you being a knight, but you've been a knight quite a few times in your Python career, haven't you?
Yes, well, I mean, the Holy Grail, that's a great addition to the British understanding of its past, was certainly a lot of knighting going on there. I was a knight. I was Sir Galahad, of course, and then the knight who said "Nick," which was a much more difficult thing to do. And I remember when we filmed it, I had to stand on a ladder to make me look about sort of 12 feet tall. I had a huge helmet on. I couldn't see anything. It was a miserable day in the Scottish lowlands. And I knew as I was doing it that this was a disaster. It was just a silliness too far. And in the end, it became one of the most popular scenes in the film.
Because it's one of the most ridiculous. It's also quite easy for us to sort of imitate, isn't it? When you were shooting that, I know that you were looking for interesting Scottish castles to film in, but actually you weren't very welcome in a lot of them because they thought you might be sort of a bit, your sort of comedy might rather degrade their, I don't know, their whole...
Yes, the Scottish National Trust were very unhelpful, and they wouldn't let us use any of their castles because they'd seen a script and they thought it was not compatible with the dignity of the fabric of the buildings. So we had to look elsewhere, and we eventually found a privately owned castle called Doune Castle near Stirling. And that was just terrific. And they have reaped the benefits of allowing us to film there because they have a lot of Japanese tourists who go there, who are fans of Python. And apart from telling them about the castle, they also sell in boxes halves of coconuts, which is a brilliant piece of market understanding. So yes, so people go there, buy the coconuts, and Doune Castle's done very well out of it.
You'll have to, just in case there are people watching now who don't understand the coconut reference, you're going to have to explain it.
Oh, well, this is a good one. In order to avoid having to, it was a sketch, it was a sketch about people on horseback coming to a castle. This was even before the film had been done. And we couldn't afford horses, so we had their knights had their sort of attendants who came along with two coconuts, making the sound of the clip-clopping of the hooves of the horse. And so when the rider stopped, the horse would go like that, and then they'd carry on. Very, very silly. And we used that. We carried on with that in the Holy Grail. It saved us an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of time, because none of us could ride horses anyway.
It's enormous comic potential. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. It was brilliant.
It was, yes. It was saved money and was funny. Yeah.
That's the way to do it, isn't it?
That's the way. Yeah.
It's what you were saying earlier is that Python wasn't terribly topical of the time. It tended to look back into history and find funny moments in history. But I want to go on to Erebus now. And that's where you've been looking back into history, into one of the most serious and terrible stories actually in history. And a lot of people don't know the story of Erebus.
Well, it's part terrible, part inspiring, because Erebus, this small ship which was built as a bomb ship in order to fire mortar rounds at defensive positions on land. So it was used in a siege, you know. So there were tough little ships with a very reinforced deck to deal with the recoil from the cannons. So they were chosen after the Napoleonic Wars had ended. We didn't have to sort of fire mortars at anybody. So they were reused for traveling to difficult areas, particularly areas where you may need ice protection and to get through the ice. And at this time, 1839, very little was known about the South Pole. A little bit more was known about the Arctic. The Antarctic was almost an unknown continent. And Erebus was chosen with its sister ship, the Terror, to sail down to Antarctica and explore this unexplored area. I mean, to find out if there was a continent there or not. Nobody knew at the time if Antarctica existed or whether it was just a series of icebergs that didn't make a continent. So it was right at the leading edge of exploration in a very dangerous area at that time. Then I would say that's the inspiring part of the story. That's the success of the ship. Then it was chosen to be Sir John Franklin's flagship for an expedition to discover a way through the Northwest Passage, north of Canada. No one had actually found their way through before, and this was going to once and for all sort that problem out. And Erebus, Terror, and all the men on board, about 128 people, all died, lost, trapped in the ice. And that's the tragic part of the story. So Erebus had been in this quite extraordinary, had this double life. But for a small, stocky little ship, it had achieved tremendous things and survived even the disappearance in the ice, because about 6 years ago, the wreck of HMS Erebus was discovered almost intact in the ice in the Arctic. And so it has, in a way, Erebus had survived. And it was the discovery of Erebus beneath the water after these 170 years or whatever that really made me, clinched my desire to write a book about the story.
Yeah, and it is an amazing human story. We know now, because for so long it was a total mystery. We literally never knew what happened to them. They sailed off into the ice. We had no idea whether how far they got, or whether they split up, or whether anyone survived, and we didn't know that for 100-odd years. And now we do have much more of an idea of what happened to them. Can you what happened to them now?
Well,
We've been able to piece together.
What they think now, fairly certainly, is that both ships were trapped in the ice in 1846 and 47 were two of the coldest winters of the century up in the Arctic, and they just could not move and they could not get out, and they were unable to survive on the ships themselves. They were running short of food. They tried to leave the ships and find their way south to the rivers of northern Canada to try and find a base or an Inuit colony somewhere where they would be safe, but they left it too late and they didn't have the strength to make any contact. So everybody died and disappeared. The ships, meanwhile, had sort of moved down and been drifted with the ice and were found in the end about 200 miles further south than where they had been abandoned. There's just the tiniest amount of information about the fact that they'd been abandoned. It's called the Victory Point Note, and it was something that was written by the people on board ship confirming that John Franklin had died and that they were leaving the ship to try and find safety elsewhere. And that's the only record we have of what they actually decided to do.
What was John Franklin like as a commander? I mean, some accounts seem to portray him as a bit of an idiot. Was he?
No, I think that's quite unfair. I think he had been involved in several expeditions in the Arctic over his life. I mean, and one or two of the expeditions had been extremely successful, and they'd mapped areas that people didn't know about at all. So he had mapped new land. And also, they'd been very dangerous, and he'd survived some very, very difficult situations. In fact, in one expedition they were in such dire straits they completely ran out of food that they were just chewing the leather from their shoes in order to get juice out of it. So he came back and he was quite canny. He wrote a book about his experiences. So he was known for a long time as the man who ate his boots. He was a bluff, clubbable, jolly man. A good one. One feels he had a good sense of humor. He got on well with people. I don't think he was the most brilliant mind. I don't think he was the most brilliant navigator. There were others like James Ross, who was the first captain of Erebus, who were actually much better at that sort of thing. But the men enjoyed sailing with him. There was plenty of evidence of that. I think perhaps he in a very difficult situation, he would have been rather jolly and said, well, let's open another bottle of wine, rather than look at the maps and see how they could get out of it. But that may be slightly unfair. He seemed really a very, very likable character, someone you would like to sail with, but maybe not in the difficult circumstances they got into.
Life is at stake, exactly. But their lives were at stake, and and like I said, it's taken until only recently when an expedition team did manage to locate both wrecks in the end. And there were lots of artifacts they found which started to tell the story.
Yes, I mean, they'd found a lot of the things that they'd taken on board just for ordinary living, like plates and goblets and wine bottles and things like that. But what was more interesting to me is actually the film that was taken on remote cameras, which were directed inside the wrecks, because it was very, very difficult for divers to go into the wrecks now, because they're so delicate. And the divers themselves say, we try and go through a narrow passageway or something like that, you dislodge something and years of history will be lost. So they sent remote cameras, and it was just seeing beds and seeing tables and seeing the lockers where they would have put their clothes. That to me was the most fascinating part of it, getting the idea of the dimensions of the ship, because these ships were not, they were about 104 feet long, with about 60 people living together and that. And so space was absolutely a premium. So to see on the camera in these wrecked ships, the amount of space they had to sleep in and to eat in was remarkable.
You wanted to go and take part in one of the expeditions.
Yeah.
How did you get?
Well, I hoped that and the whole thing for me was because I went to several of the places that were important on the expeditions. I went to the Falkland Islands. I spent quite a bit of time in Hobart, Tasmania, and up in Scotland in the Orkneys. So I desperately wanted to go and see the ship under the water. That was the ideal. Actually, that was the climax of the book. We got to within about 150 miles of the wreck site, but we were up there and we had to turn back because of the ice. Because the ice, not the same ice, but the sort of ice which had trapped the ship in the first place, stopped us from getting near to the ships themselves. If I'd gone the year later, I think it would have been fine, because they were able to get closer to the ships. The Canadian authorities are very, very wary of letting too many outsiders near the wreck sites. They're looking after them very, very carefully. So whether I've met the guys who went down there, I've met the first people who discovered the wrecks in 2014, and I think they'd put me in a wetsuit and show me what to do, and I could have done it, but I missed the moment. The book had to be finished.
Cold, isn't it? Very cold, even for experienced divers. They are very as to how long they can spend down there.
Yeah, well, I would have had a suit on and all that, but I have actually, on that same expedition, we went on board the ship. I say we got within about 150 miles, and we did the Arctic Challenge, which anyone who's been on a ship up in the Arctic knows. That's when you go into the water and have a swim, just with your trunks on. It's not. And I finally agreed to take part and got myself in the water and had a swim around off the coast there, bitterly cold, and we. When you come out, you feel so elated. You feel fantastic. Hey, I've swum in the Arctic waters, yay! And I was going on like this, and it's slightly hysterical. And they said, "Abandon. We got to abandon. Get back to the main ship straight away." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "A polar bear has been seen on the rise of the little area just part of the coast where we had been splashing around. There was a polar bear coming towards the waters, and probably wouldn't have licked me, put it that way." I might have torn my bits off.
It reminds
Sorry. My fingers, I mean.
That's one of those magic moments. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, no, it reminds me of sometimes the dangerous position you let yourself be talked into, and I can imagine that must have happened quite a few times, particularly in your travel career. Although I even remember John Cleese, I think, talking about one of the sketches you did, the fish slapping dance.
Oh yes.
You were practicing alongside a canal, or at least a riverside.
Yeah.
At the end of the sketch, you have to fall into the water. By the time you actually got to doing the take, the water had fallen quite substantially. But you still went in, you still fell in.
Yes, it was a lock, and the lock had drained. And instead of being 1 foot below the level of the lock side, it was 15 feet. But I couldn't stop then. I could have stopped, but I said, no, I'll go for it. And actually, I was really pleased because when I look at the fall, I did it rather well. I just went head first. I had a pith helmet, long shorts, and heavy Wellington boots. And I disappeared into the sort of murk of the Thames, and water immediately flooded into my boots. And for a moment, it was quite frightening because I struggled to the surface and was being sort of pulled back, and everyone was just roaring with laughter. And I kept saying, please, hang on. And, oh, that was brilliant, Mike, so brilliant. And eventually one person noticed I was in extremis and got me out. But yes, it's one of the funniest things we did in the end.
Yeah, and it's a very long-lasting sketch that, for anyone who doesn't know it, that's all you have to do is Google that sketch. It's interesting as well that we've come full circle back to full circle, pole to pole, all that sort of thing. We've come back to talking about Python, and of course you Pythons did get together, of course -1, but you did get together for a live show, which went down very well. Probably surprised even you.
Very surprising for us. We had, I mean, for quite a long time, about 15 years, we had resisted. I suppose I was one of the chief resistors of doing a Python revival on stage, because I felt Python was 6 people. We were all actors, we were all writers. And take one away, and it's like a sort of table where you take one leg away. It's not going to be quite the same. And without Graham Chapman, I felt, how are we going to do this? And people are going to feel a little bit cheated. But such was the technology that was available at the O2 Centre, and the ability to put Graham's likeness in sketches and photos, and to hear his voice, made him almost part of the show. So that was what was changed all our minds, I think, about doing it at the O2 Centre. But we were nervous whether we physically could cope with what turned out to be 10 evenings, and a very kind of physical, very athletic sort of show, and it wasn't really until the first night, when we came out of this TARDIS thing that we burst out from, that we felt that perhaps we'd done the right thing. Up to that moment, we were just full of doubts, and everyone sort of having their pulses checked and blood pressure figures, getting doctor's notes to make sure they were all right. We walked out and you forgot all about it, because the audience reaction was so extraordinary. I mean, it was like a huge sort of blanket of warmth came towards the stage, and people were just there. They were so happy to see us, and we realized that we had to do well. There was no question of just saying the lines. We had to perform them as well as we'd ever performed them. We had to be as agile as we'd ever been. And yet we were all in our 70s. And I think it was pretty amazing, actually, that we did get through those nights, and they were very special, I think, to people who've been there. Enough people have told me how it was just wonderful. But a lot was to do with with the technical side of the thing, the lighting, the sound, the playing in of video and film was just so superbly done that actually I look at it now, occasionally I'll just look at bits of the show and say, wow, yeah, we were good, which we never ever thought we were. We just thought we were lucky at one time.
I can imagine you're probably still coming under quite a lot of pressure to actually take that show elsewhere, do a global tour when that's possible.
We were immediately afterwards asked to do that. We had many offers. I was against it, partly because I wanted to get on with other things, but also I did feel that there were two things wrong. One was that poor old Terry Jones by that time was having real trouble remembering his lines and all that. His sort of dementia began to set in, and also that if you go to America and did 10 shows in New York, say we did, then they'd want you on the West Coast. And people in Germany who said, we're huge Python fans, come over to Germany. Australia would say, how dare you just go to Germany and America without coming to us? And I just thought I could see the danger of us doing it without enjoying it. The great thing about those 10 nights at the O2, we really enjoyed it. But even I can remember about night 8 standing in the wings with John, and John said, oh dear, how many more of these we got to do? So that's the thing about Python. It was always fresh. We did stage shows, we did stage tours, but never for very long, because as soon as you got bored and lost the sort of the edge of the excitement of the comedy, you might as well sort of not bother. So I think it was perfect to do those 10 nights.
I've heard you say that before, and it must make you pinch yourself occasionally and think, aren't I lucky to have made a living and been very successful doing something that I'm actually really interested in and love and find fun?
Yes, I think I look back and I do feel that's the thing I'm most grateful for, that most of the things I've done in my life have been things that I've enjoyed, not always absolutely successful, but there's been a sort of personal, sort of real personal satisfaction. I haven't been pushed into it. I haven't been forced to do something I don't want to do. And generally it's been up to me to make it as good as possible. And a lot of it has been successful. And we were able to go off after Python and do Ripping Yarns, which are not the sort of thing and never been done before. And then extraordinary, at the end of that, I go off and make films with Alan Bennett and dramas with Alan Bleasdale, and at the same time be given a job to go around the world. I mean, I think I do enjoy that sort of work, most kind of work, but I think the main thing is it's because I felt very close to it and I felt very personal connection to it, and that's always been a vital part of why I do things.
It's interesting, talking of global audiences, we have a lot of people watching at the moment, an awful lot of people are watching from America, but from elsewhere throughout elsewhere throughout the world. How does Python and that sort of humour, a lot of the humour that you've done, how does that go down differently in different countries? I mean, a lot of people say the British sense of humour just doesn't catch on in other countries, but clearly it has with you.
It does. I don't think it's a national thing. I think it's just with a certain group of people in different countries. Generally speaking, they're sort of people who've come to Python fairly young, I would say, and they're sort of undergraduates and people who've never really totally grown up or don't want to totally grow up and are responsive to the silliness and the absurdity of Python. And that can be all over the world, really. I mean, I've not heard if it's popular in China yet, but certainly in America, quite out of the blue in 1974, after we'd given up any thought of Python working in America because no commercial television company would touch it. Because in America, they said, we're not going to get any ads putting this sort of silly stuff out. But it was precisely because it didn't have any ads and remained silly that public broadcasting television, PBS in America, was so successful with it and managed to find an audience there. As I say, generally there were a student audience, but there were also people who, were fairly open-minded about comedy and had rather struggled with a lot of the American shows because they'd become formulaic. And they suddenly found Python was quite different, something completely different. It wasn't a formula. And that's why they liked it. So in America, it wasn't so much all Americans. It was a certain number of Americans were terrific fans and remain so. And I mean, I'm not going to drop names here, but I met Americans who I admired inordinately. For instance, I met Johnny Cash once on a big show, and it was a guest. We were guests together, I think, and I don't even know we were on the same show. We were in the same green room in New York studio, and in walks Johnny Cash, and there was about 5 or 6 people in the green room, and he comes straight over to me, and I'm kind of quaking because I am such an enormous admirer of him and his work, and I see him as a sort of legendary figure. And he came across and put his hand out and said, John Cash, big fan.
Oh,
That was, you know, before I'd been able to say that I loved everything he'd ever done. He's just big fan. So there you are.
that's lovely.
We had some good people.
You can tell how you were embraced as well by America by the sheer fact that they asked you to host Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
And you took your mum.
Yes, I did. I did 4 or 5 Saturday Night Lives. So the Saturday Night Live guys from Belushi and Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, who started it off, were all loved Python, Python humor. So Eric had hosted 2 or 3 times, and I came on. And on the last time I hosted, I think it was 1984. And my mother, who was born in 1904, bless her, was 80 years old. And I thought, what can I do? And I was going to America on Concorde, because that's the way they do things for Saturday Night Live. And I thought, well, I will take my mother to America. She'd only flown once in her life, and we'll enjoy New York together. And I took my sister as well. I paid for that, didn't ask NBC to fork out. And she got to New York, and we flew in Concorde, and it was so amazing. It was just 3 hours and about 5 minutes, and we were in New York. And I said to her, well, how about that, Mum? 3 hours, 5 minutes. And she said, where do we go now? I said, but I mean, and of course I realized she hadn't flown for so long. She thought that all the planes everywhere in the world were supersonic. And she was terribly cool about the whole thing. She was a lovely lady. And in the end, the Lorne Michaels, who produces Saturday Night Live, heard that my mother was around and said, is there any way at all you could persuade her to come and just be on the show just briefly? So I said, I don't think so. She's 80. She doesn't know about this world at all. But I'm sure she'd like to come and watch the show. So I said to Mum, do you want to come and watch the show and all that? And I said, yeah. I said, the people there, crazy people, want you to be on it. I mean, you wouldn't want to do that. I said, oh, well, what would I have to do? And from then on, she was hooked. And she came along and she appeared. I did my opening monologue all about how glad I was to be on the show. And she was sitting there and would occasionally tug my clothes and sort of make sure, oh, your shirt's not quite right there. Pull your tie up and all that. Yeah. Did you shave this morning? So totally interrupting my monologue. And then they enjoyed her so much. They gave her various links to do. So she would link to some mad rock bands, and she would introduce them and all that. And everybody loved her. And she was given Eddie Murphy's dressing room. Eddie not being on the show that week. So there was my mother in a room with Eddie Murphy on the outside, which I had to photograph. So that's the story. She absolutely thrived on it.
Actually, briefly, I wanted to touch on your father too, because we now have a president who has a history of having fought a childhood stammer all his life. Your father, I understand, had a stammer, which was sort of, I don't know, a friend once said that it almost imprisoned him. And you took a part in a fish called Wanda, of a man who had a very, very bad stammer and played for its comic content. But you've still, since then, I think you've set up a centre for stammering children. It's something you've learned more about yourself and obviously feel quite passionate about.
Yes, my father had a serious stammer most of his life, and I don't think I'd have done A Fish Called Wanda if he'd still been alive. It would have been just too embarrassing because we never discussed it. I never got to the bottom of why he stammered or even what it meant to him. I could tell that he was uncomfortable, and the word imprisonment is a very good one. There was just times when he wanted to tell a joke and the stammer imprisoned him. He couldn't, you know, the timing and all that. So I knew it was very difficult for him. But John Cleese had got this character in a very funny film called Fish Called Wanda, who stammered a bit and at the vital moment couldn't give the information that was required. And I thought, well, this is quite a funny idea, and one shouldn't treat stammerers as something, someone who should never talk about. Quite the opposite. And John and I did talk about what would happen with a stammer, what would happen in this situation. And I said, well, the more pressure a stammerer is under, the more difficult it is to give the information. So this was sort of woven into the story, and also it made me sort of gave me a guide to my character, who was he was a crook, you know, he's not a very nice man at all, but on the other hand, you could see that he lived in his own little world with his fish and all that. It was really actually quite threatened by the people outside. So there was some sympathy for him. But anyway, afterwards, I was approached by somebody who said that, who was a stammerer, and said that we would like to set up a centre especially for children, for therapy for children, because stammering can start as soon as children begin to form words. It's not something that comes from a shock later in your life, which was what I was always told about my father. And I felt this was fascinating. I could learn much more about how a stammer became embedded in people and how you dealt with it. And so the work at the Stammering Centre was so successful. We started with one therapist. We now have 12. We have our own place in Finsbury Park in London. And it's a centre of excellence for the study of stammering, and the therapists who work there are absolutely brilliant. And it's so nice to feel that both parents of children who stammer, parents especially actually, and the children themselves have been so thankful for being able to discuss and talk about stammering, meet other stammerers. And I think if my father had been exposed to that, things could have been so different. It would have utterly changed his life.
Oh, well done for the work with that. I think that's brilliant. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, there we are. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Great gang, brilliant therapists.
Yes. And as I say, it's so interesting at the moment now we have a new president who has fought a stammer all his life.
Yes.
And I think people need to understand that when they hear him speak, that I gather from what I've read about him, that it's still a struggle. And that's why he has to pace his dialogue in certain ways, pace himself very carefully. Often thinking about what he's going to say next, and you can see that.
Yeah.
Maybe that will lead to a greater understanding of a huge problem too.
I think the way to look at that is that a stammer doesn't mean you have little to say or you can't form thoughts properly. Many of the stammerers, Winston Churchill, Einstein, people like that, you know, they think very clearly and have so much to say that it's even more of a trap not to be able to say it. So I think Joe Biden, hopefully, is a very bright, intelligent man, and he will what he says will be what is important, and he seems to have dealt with it very, very well. But then Churchill, you know, one of our greatest orators of all time, had a stammer and had to sort of, move himself into a sentence, and it can be done. And of course, there are people who are actors. I think Derek Jacobi, for instance, was one of them, who has a stammer, but is the most brilliant actor and absolutely fluent on a public stage. So maybe this helps. Yeah. You become a different sort of character.
The more understanding helps, doesn't it? Shall we get on to some questions before I allow you to go?
Yeah, please.
Sue from Bournemouth in the UK says, would you ever consider a luxury cruise like Viking, or would that all be too soft for you?
No, I would consider it. Whether I'd actually say yes. I mean, I did go on a nice cruise up to the Arctic. I like it, limited numbers, I have to say, because I think then you get closer to your guides, you learn more, it all becomes a little bit more special. and the groups who have to go ashore. And I do like a cruise where you actually go ashore, you get involved in the places you're going to. It's not just walking through for 10 minutes and then getting back on the boat. I think those, to get the most out of those, have got to be fewer people. So I think of a small cruise I would certainly do. And I think I'd go to some of the more difficult parts of the world, because that's what's so wonderful. I have been through the Arctic, I've been through the Beagle Channel and down there on a boat, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful way to see the very remote and quite difficult parts of the world to access. So yes.
Another question that goes back to Erebus. Did you get involved in the expedition team that did find what had happened to the men? And isn't it true that they were helped a lot by the local Inuit, and certain quite nasty things were discovered as well? I mean, it was a very tragic story all in all. What do you know of that, the way they discovered that?
I wasn't involved at all. That was Parks Canada, with the people who organised it. Of course, I was involved in terms of wanting to know every day what was happening and what they'd found. The Inuit involvement is very, very important, because the Inuit testimonies were proved to be almost exactly right when they found the ships. After 100 years of the highest technology not being able to find the ships, they were found where the Inuit said they would be. And it was the lack of contact with the Inuit and lack of understanding of Inuit knowledge, which I think delayed the discovery of the ships for quite a long time.
So was it always been part of their oral history, had it?
Yes, exactly. But oral history, as you know, is not trusted particularly by Westerners who want everything written down and measured and quantified. But almost all the main breakthroughs in discovery of the ships came from Inuit information. And of course, that part of Canada now, the Inuit are very much involved in governing and understanding that part of the world. And I had hoped to go. There was a great Inuit historian called Louis Kamukak, and I was supposed to be going to see him, and he was going to take me across this bleak island where the ships were found. And sadly, he died about 18 months ago. But he was tremendously, or he was great authority on it. So the Inuit knowledge is very, very important.
And you were awarded the Louis Kamukak Medal. First
Very
ever.
good. Yes, I was. Gosh, yes. The Royal Canadian Geographical Society struck a medal for Louis, and I was the first one to be awarded. And I was incredibly touched, incredibly moved to get that.
Okay, a couple more questions. On your travels, what's the worst local food you've ever had to eat to be politely sociable?
It was probably in some airport somewhere. I think I had to probably have to include camel. We're in a refugee camp in Algeria, and they don't have much food. They sort of got some meat for us. It was camel meat, and we were there for a week. And on the very last day, when we were leaving, our host was a wonderful, generous lady. Said, "There's still a bit of camel left. It's the liver of the camel. Would you like to have a nibble before you go?" And it just shows how completely involved I was in the tent life and the refugees. So, "Oh yes, thank you so much." And I ate a bit, and I knew as I ate it that this was I was going to see this again. And I saw it again about 3 hours later as we were crossing the desert to interview some guerrilla fighters. So I think that was probably something I should not have eaten.
Yeah. Another question here. Is there anywhere abroad you would have liked to move, or still might, to live one day with your family? Would you always live in Britain, or go elsewhere?
That's a very hard one. I think probably I would always live here, just because I know so much about the country, good and bad. I've been brought up here. My parents were English and all that. I feel quite comfortable here. On the other hand, to go and live in northern Italy or somewhere like that is a dream thing. It would be lovely, but I think then you'd have to adjust yourself into another culture, and I'd always feel a bit of an outsider. So I think I shall stay here quite happily, actually. for the rest of my life, because I love this country, and I think we're very, very fortunate to live in somewhere where so much in such a small area.
And you are a peer of the realm now.
I'm a peer, yes.
Does it involve any duties, or is it entirely just an honour?
It's an honour, actually. I thought there would be more social activities or whatever, but of course it's all been, you know, almost soon as I got my award, I was getting open heart surgery, then had to be 6 months recovering from that, and then coronavirus came along, so there's not really been much chance to go off and get on my charger and put on my armour and gallop down the Strand or something like that.
That's probably my last question then to you now, is somebody's just said, has the pandemic taught you any life lesson?
Well, it's just been a bit like travelling. I think you have to be very much aware of your own strengths and your own resources. And you have to tap back in these and not feel I can't do anything unless I've got X number of people around. I love having people around. I'm very sociable. I miss my friends. I miss the physical contact. But what this has taught me is you've got to find resources in yourself to manage being, I mean, I'm not entirely on my own. I've got my dear wife for 54 years here, but largely in terms of work, in terms of what how I spend my days, I've got to make sure I don't waste my time. And I actually find that there can be an opportunity in this awful situation. Rather than just cave in and say, there's nothing we can do. There are things you can do. I've learnt a lot.
So what are you going to do now? Now when I leave you, do you rush off and get yourself something to eat, or have you got a book that you've got to sit down and write, or do you ever just veg out in front of the television?
And I shall be in a terrible flutter of excitement at having seen you and talked to you for an hour after so long. So I'll go and have a quiet lie down.
That's a great idea. It's been smashing to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. And everybody watching has been absolutely thrilled to meet you in person, as it were, nearly. But I'll let you go now and just say thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour and a privilege. Sir Michael Palin, way! Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all out there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So thank you, Sir Michael Palin. And next week, another guest with an amazing life story to tell. Next week is Southeast Asia Week, when everyone on Viking.TV will be talking about that part of the world, from Vietnam to Cambodia. And I'll be meeting Porter Halliburton, who is a Vietnam veteran who will be telling us about what it's like to be a prisoner of war for some 7.5 years, and yet still have a love for the country and its people now. As well as all that, he's a potter, a woodworker, a poet, and an inspirational speaker. So I'm looking forward to meeting him. In the meantime, have a very safe week, please. And I'll be with you next Thursday. Bye-bye.